Hey, everybody, welcome back to Entrepreneur Encounters. Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Brent Halfwasson. I'm an entrepreneur coach and business catalyst. My focus is to help to transform entrepreneurs into amazing business owners. That's why we have this show, and I think you're going to be excited with the guests that we have coming up today. But before I get there, I want to tell you why we're having this show and why Entrepreneur Encounters. It's because I believe if we're going to be successful at transforming you into an amazing business owner, you've got to get to know other entrepreneurs. You've got to see others that have traveled the journey. We want to listen to their story, understand how they become successful, learn from their struggles, and learn from their experience. That's one of the reasons that today I'm super excited to have my friend Mike Jesowshek with us. And I apologize for hitting your name there. He's the host of the Small Business Tax Saving Podcast. I've worked with Mike since 2018. I've been able to see his business grow. He's had some amazing success. And with that, Mike, I want to welcome you to the show.
Brent, thanks for having me. And don't worry about the last name. There's very few people that get it right, even after knowing me for many years. So it's typical.
Put it out there. I mean, I practiced it like 5 times before we got going. Put it out there so all of us know what it is.
The last name is Jesowshek.
Jesowshek. Yeah, just like it's spelled. I don't know if I messed that up with a name like Halfwasson. I shouldn't even do that.
Yeah, most of the times I hear a ski at the end of it, so Jesowski or something like that, and people just throw stuff in there that makes it more difficult.
Awesome, Mike. Hey, why don't you dive right in? Tell us about your business and how you started on this journey.
Yeah, so currently, right now, we have kind of 2 separate businesses where a lot of my attention is put on is a podcast that we do called the Small Business Tax Savings Podcast. So that's just weekly episodes. We also do blog posts to kind of combo that. We also have a training program. And so we teach people how to different tax strategies that they can implement, how to do their own bookkeeping, kind of serve as that accountant in their back pocket without actually having them as an accountant doing the work for them. And then our second company is called Inksight, and that's sort of kind of the back end of all that. It's our full service accounting firm. So we work exclusively with business owners across the country doing business, bookkeeping, taxes, payroll, those types of things. But really kind of how it all started is I've been an entrepreneur since I say the age of 14. I don't know if you can really be an entrepreneur at that age, but really have worked for myself ever since I started working. And I started in an industry, kind of a unique industry in online marketing, spent a lot of my career in that, and decided at some point, it's like, I got to go to school. So I went to college and decided to go for accounting. And mainly the main reason I went to school was just as like a backup. Like, what happens if this stuff doesn't work out? What happens if this great online marketing career I'm building at a young age just kind of falls on its face? So went to be an accountant, ended up moving into the finance side of our business, and graduated, got the CPA. And around that time of when I was going through the CPA exam, the company that we were with then, there were 7 of us as partners, all decided to kind of go in different directions. We're all pulling the company in different ways and said, hey, maybe it makes sense for us to just kind of go our different directions and focus on what we want to focus on. And so that's where this idea of accounting was kind of born. And really my focus now is just saying, there's so many tax saving strategies, so many ways to save on taxes for business owners, that so many people think that saving on taxes is just for the wealthy, just for the rich. And my goal with the podcast and what we're doing is just to kind of bring that awareness out there of, hey, it's not just for the wealthy. Whether you're making $5,000 a year or $5 million a year, there's tax strategies available to you. And that's just kind of through the podcast and our weekly items. That's what we're trying to bring awareness to.
Awesome. So you mentioned, and by the way, you can absolutely be an entrepreneur at 14. That's totally valid. Some start even earlier, but talk to me about why ultimately stay as an entrepreneur. I can understand some early passion. Then you go to college. A lot of folks coming out of accounting are recruited into quite a variety of accounting firms that can have some runway with them, and then a variety of other job opportunities after that. But why choose to go down the road of really focusing on small business?
Yeah, and that's a great point. I took a much different route. As you kind of mentioned, accountants, there's every accountant kind of goes through the same cycle. Go to school, get your CPA, work for a regional or big 4 accounting firm, end up putting in a ton of hours, and then working for a private company after that. And my route was completely different. I started out right away as a company that I owned. And so it's a good question. Why stay that way? And I think the reason is I have worked very few jobs where I was working for somebody else. And I've came to the realization at the beginning that that is a tough situation for me, because I don't have control to build what I want to do. It's like you're just kind of locked into the way things are being done. And at a younger age, obviously, I even have less control because I'm in high school working at a bank or going through college working at a bank, and they're not going to trust any kind of advice or any kind of innovation that maybe I would want to bring to it. And so it was just something that's the only way I knew how to do things was working for myself. I think one thing is obviously, when you're doing that through college, you have a decent revenue stream coming through, making decent amount of money. There's you say, well, I can go do whatever your other accountant is doing, but I'm going to make the same amount of money with zero kind of very low upside as compared to where I'm at now. And, within that entrepreneur journey and within the companies from 14 on, there was multiple companies in there. I sold a few businesses at a younger age. I had companies where I had partners, companies where I didn't have partners. And so I would see various different stages in a business life cycle. And I just had that opportunity to take that and help other people out with it. So, I always to this day say, what would life be like if I didn't go out on my own? But I don't know if I could, to be honest with you. I think I would struggle with that piece.
Yeah, I like what you said about focusing on the upside potential. You evaluated your options, and you're going to be putting in all those hours, all that time, all that blood, sweat, and tears, ultimately for someone else's benefit. Frankly, even if you make partner at one of the big firms, you're still ultimately putting it in for someone else's benefit.
And one thing that I always say is being a business owner, so many people think, well, you own your own business. That means you can do whatever you want, whenever you want. You don't work for anybody. And I say, well, that's not actually true. I mean, that's how business owners should operate and should look to operate. But the problem is that we get sucked into this mindset and changes. And I did that early on in my business. Is I didn't work for anybody, but I worked for every single one of my clients. If I did one thing, if one client was mad at me, well, that's an employer essentially. So instead of having one employer, I had, hundreds or 50 employers. And so that was an early on adjustment that I had to make, saying, I don't want that lifestyle where I am just always constantly dependent on somebody else and being clients. So, it's just changing that focus a little bit so that you don't feel like you are handcuffed constantly to your job and working way more than you ever should be and kind of getting into an unhealthy life cycle. I don't believe being an entrepreneur. That's just being a glorified employee for other people.
Awesome. Why don't you mentioned a couple of different businesses there. If you would, why don't you walk us through your journey? Go all the way back to 14 and just talk about some of the businesses you did. And while you're doing that, help reflect on what were some of the choices you needed to make in order to get going and be successful in those.
Yeah, well, I always kind of tell a story, and I go back even further from 14, and this was probably the age of 8 or 9. And my dad used to go to auctions, and he would buy things at an auction and then resell them on eBay. This was kind of when eBay thing was going on. And we were at an auction once, and I would always go to the auctions with him, have no clue what I'm looking at. I'm not interested in old type stuff. But sometimes he'd buy different things for me and say, okay, this one's going to be one that you're going to handle. And I remember one specifically. It was a box of bottle caps from like an old soda bottle. I don't even know what the brand was, but it was like 100 or it was like 1,000 bottle caps in just the caps, and said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to take these bottle caps, we're going to take them out, put them in plastic baggies of 25, and then sell them on eBay. So I think the bottle caps he bought for like $10, and I was selling them eBay for like $15 for 25 of them. And so that was, I always say, it's kind of like that first foray into like, wow, this is possible. Like you just, it's basically just taking something and reselling it for a higher dollar value. But the first company that I was in was online marketing. And it's kind of a unique industry in online marketing, in the affiliate marketing industry. So basically, to describe the company that I first started we would reward people for sending if they would send a new sale or a lead or something to one of the companies that we were working with. And as an example, Netflix was one of the companies back then. So we would work with Netflix, and Netflix said, we'll give you $45 if you can get a new subscriber to our system. So what we would turn around and say is we'd have a campaign where we say, hey, if you can send me a lead or someone that signs up for Netflix, I'll give you $35. And so it's that same thing, kind of that idea of arbitrage where you're just taking one thing for the other. And we'd actually did it in a form of incentivization. So we didn't pay them in dollars, but we'd say, hey, we'll pay for it was probably a PlayStation 2 at this time or something like that. But we'll buy you a PlayStation 2 if you send us, 5 people to get to sign up for Netflix. And so that was kind of the industry that I first got started in. And it just evolved into more and more from there. So, we went into eventually sold that company, small amount, but it was just a small little business that I had going, and ended up partnering with a bigger company. And it was the same idea of affiliate marketing, just at a very high level. So at this point, we would work with advertisers, people that need sales or leads, whatever it might be. And we would find affiliates that were really good at marketing that would be able to do that. And we'd kind of be that middle person. We'd take a small piece on the top, but we'd connect people that need sales or leads to people that know how to drive traffic to those types of things. And so that was a business that we did a lot with. And then from there, it ended up us becoming one of our own advertisers. So instead of, sending people to Netflix is a bad example, but let's say it's some type of healthcare product or weight loss item, we would create our own white label weight loss or skincare product. And so it was a white label. We put our own branding on it, but we would create our own brand. And then we knew that we were really good at marketing, so we would market to our own brand. And so that's kind of this idea of where much of those businesses went to. And so you can see that there is a lot of different avenues or ways that you can go within that business, whether you're the person that's really good at marketing, whether you're the person that's really good at creating a brand and creating a product, or somewhere in between there. And that's ultimately what led to our company prior to starting our accounting firm going away, is because we had really good partners within it that wanted to focus more on their specific area. And it just made sense for us to kind of split off at that point. So, that's kind of the within that industry from 14 on to 2013 was when I started the accounting firm. We worked with a lot of we had, various different parts of the industry that we worked in, had partners, lost partners, had some successes on my own, had massive failures, some really rough times where the business was suffering. And so when I looked into being accounting, I was seeing different life cycles of that business. We had successful exits and we'd have failures of companies and everything in between there. And I was like, well, I think the value that I've learned from doing this, I can take to other business owners that may be going through that same life cycle that they're in. And so that's ultimately what I decided to start the accounting firm. And initially, because we had such a good reputation in a small industry, I was able to grow our firm based on that specific industry. So we targeted affiliate marketers specifically, and that's really how our firm had its initial growth. And so, the cool thing about that industry, it was 100% remote. So everybody in it was working remotely. And this was before, long before COVID happened, and this was just more common. And so that also, when we started the accounting firm, it was unique back then. In 2013, we were a fully remote accounting firm servicing clients across the country, doing everything digitally in the cloud. Now that's much more common, especially in the past 2 years. But before that, it was very uncommon. And so that helped, I think, give me some of that experience that I had to take into a completely different industry, not related at all, but how can we take some of the way that they did business and move it into that industry?
Talk about the podcast a little bit, because now you're shifting your focus and you're bringing this podcast on, and podcasts are the rage. Everyone's got a podcast going on, but I want to hear about, why do you feel like that's the right adjacent space to get into?
Yeah. So we've been doing the podcast for 3.5 years, and how it started is we had some videos on YouTube, and I took those YouTube videos, started the Small Business Tax Savings Podcast, just took those, there's like 3 videos on there, and put them in an audio format on a podcast. Let it sit. 6 months later, I had someone reach out to me and say, hey, Mike, I've listened to your podcast episode, really liked what you were talking about on there, wondering how I can work with you. And I'm like, podcast episode? I had no clue what they were talking about. And as we started to dig back, we're like, wait. They found us on this platform that we put up and haven't even managed or done anything with it. And so that was a cue to me that, like, okay, this is something that can help source or be a lead source to our accounting firm. And so ultimately at the beginning, that was exactly why we did the podcast. And as I just continue to do the podcasts, continue to get feedback from the listeners, and really enjoy the way that we describe tax strategies, accounting tips, things like that. My passion now has just been more like, okay, we know this thing is going to generate leads. We know this thing is going to bring that. But really where my passion with the podcast is just bringing that awareness to business owners about the tax savings potential that they have. Again, I kind of talked about that in the beginning. So many small business owners that we talk to, whether they're clients or just listeners of our podcast, just think that tax savings they're too small for tax savings. And, I give examples of businesses making $5,000, $10,000 a year that can provide tax savings simply by implementing some strategies. And so that's really my passion now, is just to bring that awareness out there. The side goal of it is obviously it's a lead funnel for our accounting firm. We also have a training program that it kind of funnels into and works into as well.
Yeah. So how do you, there's only something like 81,000 pages of internal revenue code plus probably state specific guidance. So how do you decide what problem you want to solve on that? Because when you talk about tax strategies, you could probably be all over the place. So how do you figure out the problem you want to solve that's you're building a mousetrap, right? To get the most people to dive into that funnel and say, Mike, you're providing amazing value here.
Yeah. So really, I read a book a while back, probably a year or two ago, and this really kind of changed how we adapt, how we run our podcast. And it was called They Ask, You Answer. And it's this idea of the book actually started from a pool company that they started to find out what questions were people asking about pools, in-ground pools in your backyard. And they just built a blog that would touch on that. And so I took that same idea in this area and said, okay, let's listen to our clients. Let's listen to our listeners of the podcast. What questions are they asking? If one person's asking it, more than likely another person's going to want that answer. And so that is honestly how we provide all of our content now. It stems from a question that was asked from a listener somewhere down the line, a question from a business owner, someone came to me, and then we're creating content around that. And the cool thing about that is we do the podcast, which is audio, but we try to replicate that content in as many places as possible, so that whether you like to watch things, whether you like to listen to things, or whether you'd rather read something, we have a place for you to find that. So we do a blog post with every podcast episode, so they kind of mirror each other depending on the style of learning. And so that's really what stems across our idea, because at the beginning of our podcast, we were just doing episodes of what I thought would be useful. And sure, maybe it was useful for some others, but this has really driven us into diving into areas of tax strategies or tax planning that I might have never came up or thought about. But now we're using that idea of, if someone's asking it, let's create a evergreen piece of content to help support that.
Yes, you're in a way, you are crowdsourcing. It's not the content, but you are crowdsourcing the direction that you're going to be able to take the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And I honestly think that can be done in any industry, because there are so many people that, and the big thing too, that we took with the podcast is, when you start to find different types of tax strategy, let's say you say, how do I hire my kids? You'll find information out there, but a lot of times it's just kind of like dangling fruit at you. Like, here's how you hire your kids, but they don't go into any details. And that has always been my passion at the beginning, is let's try to deep dive into these strategies as much as possible. Now, I don't want to get into boring minutia and going too deep into something that is just going to bore people or not make sense. So I try to make it as simple as possible, but also try to get as detailed as possible with that direction of it. Again, I feel that if clients, or if a potential client has been listening to me for 3 years, has been finding all the information I have valuable, and they're able to actually use it without needing me, who is the first person when they actually do need someone that they're probably going to come to? And that's what we found out with that podcast, is that people, when you go to a sales process, you're not selling yourself anymore. You're just saying, here's how our process works. Here's how we do it. Because they've likely been listening to me for a year or 2 years, or maybe even a couple months, but if they're coming from the podcast, they have that know, like, and trust, at least to some degree, before even coming into our door.
Awesome. How do you, what type of obstacles have you run into along the way, either with this podcast, or you've got a long run going on the accounting business side? Like, what type of obstacles have you run into, and how have you overcome them?
Yeah, I think, especially this is even more common now, but it's always been relevant to me is one of the biggest obstacles is employees hiring and also being able to remove yourself from the business. And I think oftentimes they go side by side. One thing that I learned from the very beginning, someone said it to me, and they said, if you're hiring somebody to replace or do something or a task that you're doing, expect them to do like 60% of what you would do. So if you're hiring someone to replace you, they're going to do it at a level of about 60% of you. Now, some people are going to come in and they're going to do it at 125%. Some people come in, they'll be in that 80. Some people come in, be there, but they have that mindset. And that has always helped my mindset is that I can't expect anyone to ever replace me or do things the way that I do them. And I also wouldn't want somebody, and you come to realize that I don't want someone to do the things exactly the way I do them, because then there's no new ideas. There's nothing new coming into that. So it was more of a mind shift focus for me is being able to, one, understand that no one's going to do things exactly how I do them. And number two, being able to, have trust in someone to still take care of it. So if I have that expectation of 60 or 70%, I need to trust that they're going to meet that mark without having to be, looking at them, without reviewing things all the time, without being more of a micromanager. Trust that piece with them, because that's going to bring them comfortability, and that will eventually lead to more freedom on my end to grow the business and or whatever I want to focus on. And so that was always, I would say, the biggest obstacle I faced as a business owner, especially as you're starting to grow, is that you grow and now you're at your capacity. And then how do you fill that? And how do you fill that in an area where you trust? Like when you first start out, you're servicing all your clients. I mean, you care for these people, you really do, and they're really close with them. And when you try to bring somebody else to take care of them, you're very protective of that. And as a business owner, if you want to see that growth, you want to be able to live out that growth, you have to have trust in the people that you hire and be able to step back with that trust. So utilizing that trust with the comfortability to step back a little bit.
Oh, I think that's fantastic. Invest in knowing the people, understanding how you're going to invest in them. But the part that stood out to me was that you don't want people to do exactly what you used to do, because you limit the opportunity for new ideas. If there's an important piece I want to give anyone who's bringing people on, they're a human resource on purpose. Feel free to talk to them, learn from them. They're probably seeing things that you don't see, or maybe have chosen not to see. So yeah, definitely capitalize on that. Mike, how do you stay on top of your industry? There's always a ton going on. And I think it's more than just the tax code. It's figuring out how do you keep getting people into the businesses, running the business. So how do you stay on top of your industry?
Yeah, I mean, I do a lot of training. Much of my time now is learning from others, learning from other accountants that are teaching tax strategies, learning from other business owners, sometimes our clients, sometimes our team members. They're giving feedback to me. But one thing I'd say on top too is networking and working with other people within the same industry. Most accountants, and I think there's probably other businesses like this, but many accountants have this mindset that every other accountant is my competition. And we've kind of flipped that switch and said there is so much business out there. There's so many different personalities that business owners like in different types of industries, that we don't look at any other accountant as a competition to us, but rather an opportunity for us to grow together and learn from each other. So, one huge networking group I'm a part of is a company, or is a group called Thrival. Basically, it's a group of forward-thinking, modern-thinking accountants. And honestly, that has been so valuable to our firm business, because not only are we learning from them, finding out what's working for you. And this isn't the idea of replica. So it's not like a McDonald's where Thrival is trying to create every accounting firm to be the same every location you go to. It's actually the complete opposite. They want to encourage people to build their companies the way they want to, but as part of that, you're going to run into issues. You're going to find things that you're struggling with, whether it's hiring, whether it's processes, whether it's the type of client, whether it's sales. And by collaborating with other people, they can kind of share what that is. So we utilize networking, especially within our industry, with what most people would say competition. We do a lot of networking there because we learn so much from that, but we also are able to give back and say, hey, here's what we've done. And sometimes we've been able to improve our processes as I'm explaining to someone what we're doing, and trying to explain to them, this has been working really well for us. I'm like, wait, this little tweak that we could do in our process would make what we're already doing even better. And just by talking through that with other business owners, it helps make that kind of bring that aha moment sometimes.
I love it. The more you're getting together with other people, even in your own industry, I think the sharper that we're going to get. And I really appreciate how you're reframing, what does competition look like? I frame the world now in alternatives instead of competition. But I think that being able to understand, look, if you're really bringing a unique value proposition, it's just that it's unique. It eliminates the idea of competition and puts you in a different category so that you can learn, that you can grow, and you can succeed together. Let's keep talking about the network that you're building. Talk to me about your support community. You've got that professional networking, but what keeps you built up? How do you stay strong? How do you keep going in the business with multiple businesses and depending on other people?
Yeah, it really comes down to our team. In various different teams. We have a team within our accounting firm, and then we have a team within our podcast and people that we're working with there. And so, when we look at, the support and what keeps me going, what keeps me waking up every day to continue to do what I'm doing, it's surrounding myself with not only team members that I believe in and that believe in me, but also family and friends. Being able to surround yourself with those like-minded people that you're able to learn from them, constantly adapt, and also be challenged. I make it a point to have my team challenge me. If I put out a piece of content, find something wrong with it. Find an area that I messed up on. If I said one thing about a tax code and I was wrong, find that. Those are the things I want to encourage them to do. If I'm recording a podcast, find ways that you like, man, you sounded really odd at this time mark on the podcast or whatever. But having people challenge me to constantly be better, it allows the product that we put out across all of our different companies to just be that much better, and being able to learn from it and being able to collaborate with that team member.
Wow, I love that dependency on the team. I think and the humility to be willing to get challenged so that you continue to get better. How have you decided to persevere? Like what keeps you going? What keeps you passionate as you think about what you're doing?
That's a great question. I think honestly, as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, you get hit with so many different waves. There's days where I'm just like, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to go work for somebody else, or I'll just do the dream and I'll work for somebody else. But then you have days or moments, like even in the same day, you can have different shifts of that and be like, this is great. Like I can go out and golf and take the day off, spend some alone time because I have that freedom. And I know that I have people taking care of everything that we're doing. So, I think it's just what keeps you going is just that passion for what kind of the end goal is. When I look at what I envision the podcast becoming, our training program, our accounting firm coming, it's much deeper, it's much bigger, and we're changing and making impact much larger than what we're doing now. And so those types of things, I think, constantly setting your eyesights on something further away and something better than where you're at today is key. But also being able to understand and appreciate where you've been from where you were, 12 months ago, 36 months ago. Being able to look back and enjoy where you're at today, I think is important to create that mental stability. But as far as when it comes to growth, what keeps going, why you want to keep doing this, it's also envisioning kind of what is next. What are we going to do? And what do we want to do in a year? What do we want to do in 5 years? What does 20 years look like? And where is the impact of what we've done? What are those business owners doing? What are staff of ours doing 20 years from now when they have moved on? Maybe they've started their own firm, and that also changes kind of how are you changing the way you're doing things today?
Oh, I love that matching the vision and remembering the impact that you're going to be able to make. A lot of business owners, folks are trying to figure out how to watch the nickels themselves. They want to be careful about outsourcing, but numbers aren't always the strong suit. Give me the pitch. Why get involved with an accounting firm, and what should people be looking for when they're interviewing an accounting firm, from bookkeeping all the way up to tax planning strategy? Just give us the primer, if you would.
Yeah. So there's kind of what we call a core to your business. And I think the base core of that is bookkeeping. Every business needs bookkeeping. Now, the level of bookkeeping is going to change based on size and everything else. But even if you are someone, selling a skincare product, making a couple $1,000s a year, there still should be some type of bookkeeping system in core to that. And so that is, one thing that we stress is that sure, we can do your taxes, but if you have a bookkeeping that is a mess, doesn't balance, doesn't make sense, the tax return is going to be garbage. It's going to be irrelevant. It's going to be incorrect. And so we always kind of start with that core. Bookkeeping is kind of that backbone to your business, making sure we have a solid foundation set, making sure we have accurate financials. That includes income statement, balance sheet, and making sure that we have that readily accessible. Then our next step is to say taxes. Now, most people, when they think of taxes, think of, I see my accountant in March and April, file my taxes, and I see them again next year. That's again, when we want to flip that switch and say, when we think of taxes right now here in March, we should be thinking about tax planning. What can we be doing today that we can be saving on taxes next year, March? And so, that's this idea of tax planning versus tax paying. We want to try to focus on tax planning. What can we do? What strategies can we implement? What things can we do within our business throughout the year? So when we file our taxes, that's just taking information, that's sending it off to the state government, sending it off to the IRS. But when we file those taxes, that's just taking the information. We know we've already, before we even get to that point, have done what we could to pay the least amount as legally possible. And then obviously tax filing comes after that, and you have payroll as an add-on. But really, when you're looking for an accounting firm, I would say the first thing is that if you're in a kind of a very specific industry, maybe look to find someone that specializes in that industry. So many accounting firms now are very niche specific. So they focus on specific industries. And while sometimes that's important, sometimes it's not. If you are in an industry, that can definitely help, especially if you're in a high growth mode. If you're just getting started, working with an accountant that's kind of a generalist is probably okay. No big deal. But if you're in a business that's really in a high growth mode, having someone that has only worked with clients in your industry, helping them get from 0 to $1 million to 10 million, can really be an asset that maybe a generalist might not be able to bring. So I'd always say, if you're looking for an accountant, maybe look at someone in your niche that focuses on your type of industry. But again, I would ask those questions about tax planning. What are they going to do to help you save the most on taxes? That, I believe, is the most missed part and biggest mistake that business owners make. Traditionally, a business owner's biggest expense or biggest out of pocket is going to be tax money. And so it makes sense to focus on that first.
So you've done the podcast now for 3.5 years, I think you mentioned. Share with our viewers, if you would, and the listeners that are picking this up, what are a couple, 3 tax saving strategies that are probably highly overlooked by, say, that $1 million and less crowd? And I'm going back to what you're saying, the folks who think, I don't make enough money to have to do tax planning and tax savings, all that stuff's written by Congress for the rich guys and the big guys.
Yeah. So the first thing I start, and this can go very deep and move into different strategies, but it's this idea of after-tax dollars and pre-tax dollars. So traditionally, we want to say, how can we move after-tax dollars into pre-tax dollars? And so let's what are after-tax dollars? Imagine you're a W-2 employee. You have a gross payroll that you make, and they take all these taxes out, and then whatever's left over is what you get that's deposited into your bank account. Now, any spending you do after that point is all considered after-tax dollars. That money has already been taxed by the time it hits your bank account. So if you go pay for a basketball camp for your kids, you go buy this, and this, that's all after-tax dollars. As a business owner, we have the ability we have our gross revenue or our sales, and then we have all these expenses that go into it, and then whatever's left over is what we pay taxes on. So it's this idea of, how can I turn typical after-tax money that I'm going to spend anyways, into a business expense, find a business purpose for it, and now turn an after-tax dollar into a pre-tax dollar. And I think one of the greatest examples of this I can give is, let's think about COVID. When COVID hit, you got sent home, you had to work. If you're working in an office, now you're working from home. If you're a W-2 employee, let's say you had to go out and buy a desk and a chair, and now you're using your internet. Now you're using a special office that you have organized at your home. If you're a W-2 employee, you're paying for all of those items after your money's already been taxed. That desk you buy, it's after-tax dollars. As a business owner, you want to buy that desk, you want to buy that new monitor that you might have, the home office that you're working in. All those items can all be business items. So it's spending that you're going to do anyways, but how can we find a business purpose for it? And so that goes into various different strategies. So I always say, as a start, go through your personal spending. Is there items that you're spending every day on that could be a business deduction? And if so, let's start to run those types of items through the business versus paying for them with after-tax dollars. That leads into kind of another one of my favorite strategies, that especially for those with children, is hiring your children in your business. This is, again, one of my favorite strategies because everybody, we all know us as parents, we're paying for our children somewhere. There's always something that we're paying for them, whether it's a basketball camp, whether they're going to the Dells and hanging out with friends, and we're paying for food and entertainment they're having while away with family or friends. We're paying for those types of things. So why not find a way where we can hire the kids in our business, get a business deduction for them, and let the children then pay for those types of things themselves, that basketball camp that they want to go to. Now, other parents say like, no, I'm still going to pay for that basketball camp, but could I put that money now that the child's earning into a Roth IRA or something like that? And so the beautiful thing with hiring your children is if you're operating as a sole proprietorship or a single member LLC, if you pay your children from your business, you don't have to withhold for Social Security. You don't have to withhold for Medicare or federal unemployment. So there's no taxes to withhold. And anybody's earned income under roughly $12,000 is tax-free. So you could pay your kids up to say $12,000, get a business deduction. Your kids would pay no income taxes on that money. I mean, that's a great strategy to use. Now, of course, your kids have to be doing work in your business. You have to be paying them a reasonable rate for the work that they're doing and documenting everything properly. But it's a great way, again, that basketball camp typically going to be after-tax dollars. That vacation or that special treat that you're going to give them typically going to be after-tax dollars. Now you can pay them through your business. They can pay for that basketball camp. We just move spending that you were going to do anyways from an after-tax dollar into a pre-tax dollar. So that's kind of the idea behind. That's a good example to use when describing that. And you mentioned three, so the final one.
Let me pause you there, Mike, because I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and family getting involved shows up, in a lot of them. So let's just talk about a few. Like, what are some reasonable ways? Here's some things that came to mind for me. If you have someone, particularly even if they're young kids, if someone's cleaning your office, that home office that you set up, the filing of the paperwork. I remember I was cleaning up some files, and I found I used to actually, my dad was a farm manager, and I used to actually color in farm maps based on the soil type, because that helped determine how much you could sell them for. And I would just do that work. So what are some other examples of ways that aren't obvious? I mean, if they're working the cash register, that's an easy one. What are some other ways that maybe are not as straightforward that come to mind?
Yeah. And honestly, Brent, this is one of the biggest questions we have. I'll have a solo attorney say, I'm an attorney. How can my 8-year-old work in my business? And I said, we have to dig a little bit deeper. We have to think further than that. Can they be stuffing envelopes? Are we doing some mailers maybe? And stuffing envelopes might sound odd now, but I'm still seeing a lot of mail coming through that way. Could they be stuffing envelopes, filing papers? A big one that I like at that age of 10 to 11 is social media posting. We were working with an attorney and as well as an electrician that was doing no social media posting. And I said, why don't you hire your kids? That sounds like a great job for a 10-year-old. They know more about social media than you do anyways. He's like, Mike, I got so much business. I don't need social media. I don't need to do advertising. And I was like, well, that's great. But if you could hire your kids and have a reason to pay them. And let's say that social media flops. No one comes in from that business. Who cares? You still just now hired your kid illegally way in an effort to make your business better through potential marketing and advertising. So, I always just said, let's get a little bit creative about how we can do that. As you mentioned, vacuuming a home office, even though if it's a home office, cleaning that up is totally fine. But again, that's going to change with the age of the child. I think, usually we start to say around age 7 and just based on some tax court cases that came out, age 7 is a pretty safe area going up from there. Underneath that, it's probably going to be little dollar amounts. But the key thing is that whatever they're doing, just make sure it's a reasonable rate for that type of stuff. But, again, finding that reason should be the easy part, because there's going to be things that you have to think about. Okay, I'm not hiring an employee. Like, think of this as a way as I'm going to spend money to put my child through a basketball camp. How can I get a business deduction for that? That's the way we want to be thinking about it. Not, am I getting enough value out of this money? Or I don't need social media, so why should I pay for it? That's the kind of the focus that we would say, let's get more on the creative side.
Love it. And then go ahead and hit us with that third strategy that was coming to mind.
Yeah, third strategy is this idea of an S corporation. So most people are set up as LLCs or a sole proprietorship, maybe no entity structure. And an LLC or a sole proprietorship or a single member LLC naturally are just called disregarded entities, which basically means that you pay self-employment taxes on 100% of your income. So if you're a Schedule C person, single member LLC, you make $80,000, you pay your normal income tax rate plus self-employment tax, which is about 15%. So you're looking at, say, $11,000 or so in self-employment taxes on that income. This idea of an S corporation is simply a tax election. You remain an LLC. We're just electing for you to be taxed as an S corporation. And what that does is it splits your income into two pieces. You're going to have to take a W-2 salary as owner of your company. You're going to pay yourself as if you're a W-2 employee. And that piece gets hit with self-employment taxes, that 15.3%. But the other remaining portion of your income, you avoid self-employment taxes on. And so that's kind of the beauty with the S corporations, that we're taking your total income. Let's look at that $80,000, and we're splitting it into, let's say a reasonable salary for the work you're doing is $36,000. We're going to pay self-employment taxes on $36,000, but we're avoiding self-employment taxes on $44,000. That's roughly $5,000 to $6,000 in tax savings, simply by moving your LLC from a disregarded entity to being taxed as an S corporation. So an S corp is a strategy that we say is usually our core, our base, a starting point in many businesses, with a few caveats. S corporation means that you have to file a completely separate business tax return. Now, you don't pay taxes at the business level. That's still going to flow through. You're going to pay that at the personal level, but you have to file a separate business tax return, which is a little bit more complex, which is also why we say you need that income statement, their profit and loss, and a balance sheet, because that's required for that return. And with that brings with it some costs. The second piece is you need to run payroll to yourself. Again, with that brings with it some costs. Now, if you already have employees in your business, just adding you as an employee is not that big of a deal. But if you're, say, a solo and now adding payroll, it comes with some costs. So we say those costs could range anywhere from, say, $1,500 to $2,500 a year. And so because of that, we say, when does an S corp make sense? Usually for those that are making $50,000 or more in profit per year and expect to maintain that. That's going to far outweigh any additional costs that you have, bring you more savings, and it's going to be a year after year savings. So S-Corp is something that I would definitely check out if you're in that $50,000 or more range. Key thing is you have to have an LLC set up in order to elect S-Corp status. So if you're operating as a sole proprietorship, we can never elect S-Corp status with a sole prop. We'd have to have that LLC set up. Now, we can start an LLC and hold off on the S corporation until our business grows to a point where it makes sense. But that's where having that LLC set up with the ability to transfer it to an S corporation or elect S corp status when it makes sense is super valuable.
Love it. Now, you've mentioned a term that some people may start getting a little bit crazy. They're like, Mike, you keep saying avoiding taxes, like I'm supposed to pay my taxes. Can you touch quickly on the difference between tax avoidance and tax evasion? Because I think it's a super important distinction, but I think that's where a lot of people might get a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you kind of mentioned before how long the tax code is. It's many, many, many pages long. And the tax code was written the way it was for a reason. It's for the ability for people to utilize the way the tax code is written to take deductions that are legal and available to them. And so that's just the biggest thing. When we look at tax minimization or lowering your tax bill, we're always talking about legal items here. So we're just taking what's written in the tax code and utilizing that to our advantage and making sure that we're utilizing it. Now, the IRS doesn't go out there advertising saying, hey, if you pay your children in your business and your sole proprietorship, you don't have to pay that. You don't have to do any Social Security, Medicare, or anything like that, withholding for them. They don't go out there and advertising that, but it's directly within the tax code. And so that's where, being aware of that there is potential out there and starting to do some research on that tax planning side is so key. So tax, illegal stuff, that's a completely different realm. That's not somewhere we would go ever. But it's just this idea of, again, taking this very complex, very big tax code, and it's written that way for a reason. Some point down the line, someone in Congress, somebody said, we want to make this legal. So when it becomes legal, now it's available to all the business owners out there. And that's kind of what we're utilizing is trying to dissect the different pieces of that tax code of what's legal and making sure that business owners are aware of that piece.
Love it. One point of clarification. I don't want to dive too deep, but on that hiring kids, if you have elected to be treated as an S corporation, can you still do the technique with hiring your kids?
Absolutely can still hire your kids with an S corporation. The only difference now is that you're hiring them as, the entity is an S corporation. So technically, if you're hiring your kids with an S corporation, you would then need to withhold Social Security and Medicare, that 15%. Now, the beauty behind it is if they're under that $12,000 annually, they're still not going to have any federal taxation. So you're just taking that 15% hit. And that also still includes a business deduction. Now, there's also a workaround. Like, let's say you have your S corporation, and let's say you have another business of yours that does marketing. We sometimes call them family management companies. So there is a way that you could hire your kids through another business of yours that maybe contracts through your S corporation, where that other business is a sole proprietorship or a single member LLC disregarded entity. But yeah, if you're paying your kids out of the S corporation, Social Security and Medicare tax you have to withhold and send in. If you're paying them as a single member LLC or through a sole proprietorship, no FICA, so no Social Security and Medicare withholdings. I would also say that if you have a rental property, we're talking about operating businesses in this situation. Let's say you have a rental property. You can hire your kids in rental properties too. And again, that would be the same situation, no Social Security, no Medicare. So you have a rental property that you have your kids go clean. If it's an Airbnb or something like that, that's all things where you can hire your kids in that setting too. So it's not just for operating businesses.
Love it. Mike, tell us how people are going to get a hold of you and where they can find the podcast.
Yeah, so you can find our podcast, Small Business Tax Savings Podcast, on basically any podcasting platform out there. Otherwise, if you go to our website, it's just taxsavingspodcast.com. You'll find information on the podcast episodes on there, our blog that has everything listed out that kind of mirrors our podcast, as well as our tax minimization program, which is that subscription program that we have, kind of call it our accountant in your back pocket. So you can find everything there. Again, that's taxsavingspodcast.com.
Awesome. Hey, you've been watching Entrepreneur Encounters. My guest, Mike Jesowshek, has been with us. He's the host of the Small Business Tax Saving Podcast. Man, there was a wealth of information there. I already want to start chopping it up into pieces and putting it out there because they're so important. But here's some of the takeaways I took with me. When you bring people onto your team, trust those people, listen to those people. They're bringing new ideas, and that's going to help you be successful. Item number 2 I'd throw out there is when you're out there networking, don't be afraid of people who are maybe in a similar industry to you. They're not necessarily your competitors. Sometimes they're alternatives, but because you're unique in what you offer, there are ways you can learn and continue to grow. So if you want to keep getting together with other people, Entrepreneur Encounters is still offering the opportunity totally free Wednesdays, 4:30 Central. Join us, bit.ly/entrepreneurencounters.com. We have entrepreneurs coming together, sharing their stories, sharing what they get excited about, sharing what they're enthusiastic about, sharing what's essential to them being successful. So I want to continue to invite you to join that. It's been an amazing opportunity to watch people grow, learn from each other, share their difficulties, get accountability, and share their success stories and get cheered on. I don't do this myself. There are no self-made entrepreneurs. I don't even think there are self-made people. Everyone contributes along the way. I've got some amazing sponsors. Andrew Feller Photography has done all our photos both here and on our website. Buckethead Creative does our graphics. Charlie's Music Factory and Chris Crane does our music on the way out. And Megan Bruzan Consulting has helped us with our initial web presence and also getting the podcasting started. So again, I'm Brent Half-Lawson, business coach and entrepreneur. If I can help you figure out how to grow your profit and accelerate your business and transform you into an amazing business owner, reach out to me. Get that QR code or go to bit.ly/coachwithbrent. Let's get some time together and figure out how I can best support you. Again, thanks for joining us for Entrepreneur Encounters. And with that, Chris, go ahead and take us out.
Come on. I'm ready.